Idaho Matters is brought to you in part by St. Luke's Pharmacy, now offering free home delivery. For daily medications or one-time prescriptions, home delivery is easy to set up. It's convenient and safe. St. Luke's Pharmacy, now delivering to your doorstep. Information on how to get started at stlukesonline.org.
So you can't see this, but hopefully you can hear it. Behind every Boise State Public Radio podcast is a team working hard to bring you stories that matter. So if you value podcasts like this one, please support them. Hit donate at boisestatepublicradio.org. Thanks.
From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Samantha Wright, filling in for Gemma Gaudette. It's Friday, and it's Idaho Matters. That means it's time for our Reporter Roundtable. Idaho sold 160 acres of gorgeous state endowment land near Driggs, despite some objections. We found out that there were over 40 campaign complaints that came in before Idaho's May primary. Idaho needs to spend its federal health care fund fast. The Boise River got a report card, and Idaho State Police turned over 30 immigrants to ICE. Plus, Josh Ritter is going to belt out some tunes for Boise's America 250 celebration. Our Reporter Roundtable is with us to give us all the details on all of those stories. So Clark Corbin and Laura Guido are here with the Idaho Capital Sun. Hey, happy Friday to both of you.
Happy Friday, Sam.
All right. Okay, Clark, we're going to start with you. You reported on a sale of land next to the Teton Range that stirred up a little bit of controversy. Start by telling us exactly where this is and how big is this chunk of land?
Yeah, for sure, Sam. Thanks. I'm glad we get to talk about it. We're talking about 160 acres of state endowment land. It's in Teton County in eastern Idaho. It's outside the town of Driggs, and you can see Grand Targhee Resort from the land. But it's 160 acres of state land, state-owned endowment land that had been used for grazing. There was actually a lease that a local ranching family had to graze on the property that was valid until 2032. But as those things go, the fine print in the lease allowed the state to sell it. This has been something that's been developing since last summer. The Idaho State Board of Land Commissioners voted last summer to sell the property, and I've come on Idaho Matters a couple of times to talk about it, but there's been a lot of interest in this, as you said. I think overall there's been broad interest in public land and state-owned land across the West over the last couple of years. It's been a big issue, but what happened is it's considered state-owned endowment land, and when Idaho became a state in 1890, Idaho was given about 3.5 million acres of land from the federal government under the condition that that land be managed to generate the maximum financial return for beneficiaries, most of which include Idaho public schools, but also colleges and universities, veterans' homes, state hospitals, and things of that nature. And so Idaho has about 2.5 million acres left of state endowment land, and the reason this came up for auction is because a neighboring landowner expressed interest in it, and that sort of triggered this clause in the Idaho Constitution that required the state manage the land to generate these maximum returns. And so under the lease, Sam, the state was only getting about $960 a year from the property, but they knew that it would sell for millions of dollars potentially at auction, which is what ended up happening. It sold for $5 million, but people objected because they were concerned that this was state-owned land and that it was an opportunity to be sold off to the highest bidder, potentially a millionaire or a billionaire, and then no one knew what would happen to the property after that. And so there was concern and question about whether it would be developed. So there was actually a petition. More than 2,000 people signed a petition objecting to it, and 2/3 of the Teton County, Idaho commissioners asked the state of Idaho to stop the sale or to hold off on the sale until after the lease ended. But the state voted to go ahead with the sale, Sam.
Wow. Okay. So the sale happened. Somebody bought it. Do we know who bought the 160 acres?
Yeah, we do. And there actually may be a silver lining at the end that's developing. I reported this story with some reporters from the Jackson Hole News and Guide, and they did some reporting out of Teton County, whereas I went to the auction that was held here at a hotel just outside of Boise. But it was bought by a real estate holding company called TR Lot Holdco. But that's a company that's controlled by a billionaire businessman and movie producer named Thomas Toll. And he has a big property in the area called the Teton Ridge Ranch. And he's actually donated quite a bit of money, both to local nonprofit organizations in Teton County, but also more than $100,000 to political committees and Republican candidates in Idaho. And some of the candidates that benefited from the Political Action Committee included Governor Little and Secretary of State Phil McGrain and State Superintendent Debbie Critchfield, who are all on the land board who voted to make the sale. And so this company, controlled by Thomas Toll, bought it. But my reporting partners at the Jackson Hole News and Guide found out that it sounds like, initially at least, the word is that property won't be developed and that the owner is going to allow the family that had the grazing lease to continue to graze their animals on the property just as before. So right now, the word is that there is, a silver lining, that it won't be developed and that the family will continue to graze their animals on the property. This is still just very recent. The auction was just last Friday, right before Memorial Day weekend. And so, it's very new. But there was, concern about, we didn't know who was going to end up with the property or what would happen to it. But there's quite a bit of information. We've done several stories at IdahoCapitalSun.com, including about the auction. It was interesting. There was a lot of speculation over how much money it would go for. But Mr. Toll's company was the only bidder. There were no other competing bidders, and $5 million was the minimum price set by the state, Sam. So I know there was a lot of interest in how much money this would generate. And there's just broad interest, like we talked about state-owned lands and about public lands all over the West. So we've got a lot of information about the sale and about the property, both at IdahoCapitalSun.com and at the Jackson Hole News and Guides website. They've covered it for almost a year now with a strong emphasis on local reporting. So I'm glad we got to talk about that because there is a lot of interest in state land. And there was discussions this legislative session about a constitutional amendment to change that requirement to sell the land to benefit the maximum financial returns. That proposal was unsuccessful, but I expect, Sam, a lot of discussion about public land and state endowment lands well into the future, Sam.
Absolutely. And, we've heard over the years, we hear about these sales that pop up, whether it's, cabins on a lake or places like that are state land that they, they're required to try and get as much money as they can out of the land. And you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, and that's the reason is the Idaho Constitution has that requirement. And so when I ask the land board members and the Idaho Department of Lands officials, like their director, they say that's why these sales are put in motion, because of those requirements in the Idaho Constitution and because of that policy requirement. So yeah, it also comes up in those cabin sales and those cottage sales. You're absolutely right, Sam.
Wow. Interesting, fascinating. And there's a lot more in the story, which we will link to on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org. Laura, you reported there were more than 40 campaign complaints before the May primary. So tell us about this story. That seems like a lot. I don't know. But tell us about what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, in the last few years, this state has just seen a lot more money in campaigns, which comes with more complaints. So I asked the Secretary of State's office for kind of a list of all these complaints and what they've done. And mostly it's things like a billboard didn't have who it was paid for, or there was a push poll sent out, texted out, and people didn't know who was sending them. Things like that. Sometimes things would people would pay for mailers and stuff, and they wouldn't show up right away in filings, and so people were worried that they weren't reporting those, but then the reports would show up later. So a lot of things like that.
Gotcha. Who investigates these kind of complaints? Who actually has to look these up?
Yeah, so the Idaho Secretary of State's office oversees the statewide races, the judicial races, those bigger races, like things like county commission races or other local races. Those are done by county clerks. So several of the complaints actually ended up getting referred to the county.
So tell us about just maybe a couple of these. Give us a couple examples of some of these complaints. You kind of gave us an idea, but there were some that were, kind of more than just a billboard, I guess.
Yeah, so there were probably 3 or 4 complaints against the Bonner County Central Committee because they endorsed primary candidates in the Republican primary. And those endorsements included their chair at the time, Scott Herndon, who was running for District 1 State Senate. And people were not sure if that's something that they can do. The Secretary of State's office, looked into it, and they found that the Central Committee had internal processes to try and keep things separate. And then they also found that, having their own, what they called official Republican voter guide was protected political speech. So they were found to be in compliance, but they did stir some complaints. There was another interesting case in District 15. A Republican candidate had a complaint somewhat related to a previous 2006 felony conviction. Under state laws, candidates aren't eligible for office if they have a felony conviction and they haven't yet served their complete sentence, which includes parole. So the Secretary of State's office was looking into, is he eligible for this office? Has he done everything that he needs to satisfy that sentence? But then while they were looking into that candidate actually was arrested again and had another felony charge that hadn't been convicted yet, but the candidate decided to withdraw himself voluntarily. So the Secretary of State's office stopped looking into that. And then one more, I think, is a good reminder. If you own multiple businesses, those businesses together are held to the same $1,000 contribution limit. So if I owned Laura LLC and Guido Incorporated, those businesses together, if I'm contributing to one candidate, have the same $1,000 total contribution limit. So I could contribute $500 each from each business, but I couldn't have each of them donate $1,000. And so there was an issue with 3 businesses owned by the same person, each donating $1,000. And so they were over the limit, and those candidates had to return the money that went over that $1,000 limit.
Well, that's quite there's a wide variety there of complaints, and you've got more in the story because you really dug into this. So what happens with these complaints? Were most of them fixed before the election?
Yeah, it seems like most of them, the Secretary of State's office most people are not violating this on purpose. And often what it takes is an official calling being like, hey, you need to add, a disclosure statement on this billboard or this sign. And most candidates just fix it on their own. A few of them are harder to track down. I mean, sometimes these text messages go out and they're clearly pushing for or against a candidate, but they don't say where they come from. And there's a few of those that the office has been trying to track down, but they haven't yet been able to.
Well, it's a really good story. Everyone should check it out. Clark, the Boise River got its first official report card last week, and it got a pretty good grade. How did it do?
Yeah, it's the first official report card that was issued by a nonprofit organization called Idaho Rivers United. And I went out to the river on Thursday last week and met some of their team and volunteers out there. And overall, they said the Boise River is doing well. It's healthy, it's thriving in a lot of areas. And what this was based on, Sam, was volunteers did 103 different water quality sample tests at different locations on the Boise River last year. And they were analyzing things like water temperature and water clarity and pH levels and looking for any chemicals or pollutants in the water. And while that was going on, they also had teams of volunteers all throughout the year cleaning up the Boise River as part of their Boise River Stewards program. And they were able to remove almost 4,000 pounds of trash from the river
Wow.
last year overall. And at the end of, in a couple of minutes, I'll have a website that I can share for folks, or if they would like to find out more information about volunteering for a river cleanup or learning more about Idaho Rivers United, I have a website that I can share. But yeah, overall, they found that it was a pretty healthy report card for the Boise River, Sam.
Well, you reported the river got good marks in 3 areas: as you said, water clarity, pH level, average temperature. Why is water temperature so important? Did they say?
Yeah, it's something that they're monitoring for a lot of different reasons, but it has to do with wildlife habitat and aquatic species. And one of the things that some of their team members talked to me about is they're going to be watching the water temperature, and we're saying it might not be quite optimal for fish spawning for cold water fish species. And so that's one of the things that they're going to continue to monitor for. They're also going to do some additional tests to kind of follow up on some of the things that they looked at last year and try to be a little bit more precise. But when I talked to the folks at Idaho Rivers United, they said that this is going to become an annual project, that they're going to do ongoing water quality sampling on the Boise River each year with their teams of volunteers. And I think the goal is to put out a new report card every year. And so they're going to be able to monitor going forward. This is what they found in the first year here in 2026 as the baseline. And then they'll be able to compare that looking at sort of those same things: water clarity, temperature, pH levels, and things of that nature to kind of have an overall look at the river and how it's doing. I thought it was super interesting that they talked about the history of the Boise River being polluted and sort of a dumping ground and neglected. And really, before the 1970s, they said the Boise River was not healthy. It was not in good shape. And what they attribute it to is a variety of factors, but starting in the 1970s with the passage of the Clean Water Act, but also Boise rallying around its river and the Boise River Greenbelt development and conservation projects. But then currently, Idaho Rivers United, Sam, has river stewardship programs and river cleanups that are offered all throughout the year. When I was out at the river, I met a volunteer named Madeline who said when she moved to Boise a few years ago, she was looking to get involved in fly fishing. And when she found out about river cleanups at a local beer festival, she got involved and she found it super rewarding to clean up the Boise River in an area that she enjoys fly fishing at as well. And so I've got a website that I can share for Idaho Rivers United, and it's just idahorivers.org. And at the top of their website, they have information about getting involved and volunteering for river cleanups. But yeah, I thought it was kind of an interesting story. It is a nonprofit organization that released this new report. And if you want to look actually at the river report card itself, that same website, idahorivers.org, has the Boise River report card there. And they highlight a lot of the more technical information and have some graphics and information where you can go maybe a little bit deeper than I was able to talk about on the show today, Sam.
That's perfect. I love that. That is great. Laura, you've got a story about the Idaho State Police transporting 30 more immigrants from prison to ICE. So what do we know? What did this story tell us?
Yeah, this is part of an ongoing agreement that the governor signed last summer. It's called a 287G agreement with ICE, and basically the Idaho State Police have agreed to, when needed, transport folks who have served their sentences here that are undocumented and send them to ICE detention centers for eventual deportation.
Gotcha. And there was a change with this latest 30 people that had to do with criminal convictions. Give us the difference and why this is a little bit different.
Yeah, so earlier this month, we were kind of given a list from the governor's office of the most recent 30 people that were transported by ISP, and I was able to find their criminal convictions and records with the Idaho Department of Correction, showing that they'd been in prison, they've served at least some of their sentence before they were transported, for all but maybe one, and that could do with if it's in a different jurisdiction. There were some inconsistencies with spelling of names or putting in folks with two last names. But the first list that we got came in October and was 53 people. And, that there were at least 6 people in that list that had charges, but they ended up getting transported, or at least records strongly indicated that they ended up getting transported before those cases were finished. And Idaho State Police Colonel Bill Gardner told Investigate West in December that he didn't realize that had happened until he saw our reporting that was the case, and they have now been verifying that convictions are being reached before they transport people, and that they're actually serving their time before getting deported.
That's a fascinating story. Thanks, Laura. Clark, did I read that Josh Ritter is coming to Boise's 250th celebration this year?
Yeah, that's right, Sam. Found out earlier this week that Idaho native, that Moscow High School graduate Josh Ritter will be headlining the Idaho America 250 Capitol celebration in Boise. That's a mouthful for me to say. But yeah, we're celebrating. It's going to be on July 4th. It's going to be in front of the state Capitol building at Cecil D. Andrus Park, and it'll be part of this big America 250 July 4th celebration that's going to include, starting in the morning, a veterans breakfast, a parade through downtown Boise, a military flyover and performance, and then concerts and food trucks headlined by Josh Ritter and also other Idaho musicians, including the Afrosonics and Jeff Crosby and Chad Marvin, who made a song about America 250 in Idaho. And really what this is, Sam, it's the celebration of the Declaration of Independence being signed 250 years ago in 1776. But yeah, maybe check that out on July 4th. I think the concerts are going to start in the early afternoon at Cecil D. Andrus Park in front of the state capitol building, but there will be stuff going on all day, from the breakfast in the morning to the parade to the flyover, and then at night there will be fireworks. And we've got more information at the Idaho Capitol Sun about some of the other grants and some of the other celebrations that will be taking place in communities across Idaho as part of the America 250 celebration, Sam.
Yeah, a lot of good info in there. Thank you, Clark. Laura, we've got about 2 minutes left. You found out that Idaho has to spend some federal health care money in a hurry or lose it. So where's the money coming from, and how much money are we talking about?
Yeah, last July, you might remember the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which had a lot of things in it, but part of it was a lot of money for rural health care. It's a 5-year grant, and Idaho received in the first year $186 million to spend. And a federal official that's heading up the office that oversees this grant was in Boise on Thursday, and she told some state lawmakers that the October 30th deadline to spend that is a hard deadline, and they really need to get that money out the door, because if they don't, then it'll be taken back and given to other states.
Wow. All right. There is actually a lot more to that story as well. But we're out of time. Laura and Clark, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. Have a great weekend.
Yeah, thank you.
You too, and a very big thank you to our Reporter Roundtable this week, Clark Corbin and Laura Guido with the Idaho Capital Sun. We're going to put links to all of their great stories on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org.
And thanks so much for listening to Idaho Matters from Boise State Public Radio. Do you have thoughts about today's episode? Make sure you email us at idahomatters@boisestate.edu or reach out on our socials. If you're really enjoying this show, a quick rating or review on Apple or Spotify really helps other folks discover us, and we'd appreciate it.
You know, every day on Up First, NPR's Golden Globe-nominated morning news podcast, we bring you 3 essential stories. At the heart of each story are questions. What really happened? What really mattered? What happens next? At NPR, we stand for your right to be curious and to follow the facts. Follow Up First wherever you get your podcasts and start your day knowing what matters and why.